this computer. Great. All right, so welcome to Job and Internship Search. I'm going to go through 5 tips for successful job or internship searches. Like I said, if you have specific questions about industries or any of the things I'm talking about, I'm happy to answer them. All right, so step number 1 is really preparation, which is inventorying your skills and really sitting down, taking the time to figure out what skills you have and confirming that those skills appear on your resume and in your cover letter. It's a skills economy. Many employers don't really worry as much about major. There are certainly exceptions, but I'm sure you guys are getting pushed really weird jobs on Handshake. And the reason you're getting pushed those jobs is because employers have not put limit to this major. They're open-minded about majors. What they want are specific skills. So sitting down and creating a column on a single piece of paper for what are my hard skills, what are my soft skills, and what are my tech skills? Just thinking through your experiences. This could be jobs, this could be classroom experiences, this could be any number of things. It could be life experiences you've had, even travel, but thinking through what skills you've acquired. The difference, obviously, between a hard and soft skill is a hard skill is something that is a specific action you can do, whereas a soft skill is part of a behavior, right? And part of a quality you bring to an employer. And then the technology skill is often what's the tool you use to do that. So sometimes there's some overlap between those, but sitting down and inventorying what your skills are is really important. One thing I will say is that, especially at DePaul, we have a lot of students who, you know, I don't know, I think most of the students aren't really socialized to think that they're like super qualified. And I do work with a lot of students with imposter syndrome. It can be really hard to go through and kind of identify skills. That is something we're really good at helping you with. So if you decide you're like, I'm going through this list and I'm only thinking of 5, and I'm sure there's more, which I'm sure there are, you can have a conversation with us in the Career Center and we can help you do this step if that's something that isn't coming naturally to you. One of the things you want to do during this whole process, and we're going to talk through more parts of the step, particularly the research piece, be prepared to upskill as you start to discover the difference between your inventory and some of the in-demand skills, depending on what's happening in the current labor market. So for example, more and more jobs want people with experience on a real-time communication tool like Slack or Teams, right? Because most of the work in the pandemic relies on that kind of tool. And if you start seeing in your search a certain skill appear again and again and again, and it's not a skill you feel you have, and again, this doesn't have to mean something you're an expert at, but a skill you have any knowledge of, then be prepared to look for opportunities to practice that skill or upskill yourself. That could be something as simple as a 20-minute YouTube video about a tool, right? Like Slack. That could be getting a free account on Slack, playing with it for 20 minutes, calling it done, and saying, all right, that's a skill I have. We need to make sure these skills land on your resume first, and then in your cover letter, but particularly on your resume. And what I can't say enough is that you do not have to be an expert to have a skill on your resume. If a job wants a particular proficiency of a skill, they will tell you that, and you will have to evaluate for yourself whether or not you have that. One thing I work with students on is I often see preferred skills. Preferred means it'd be great. So yes, if it's something you can teach yourself in a couple hours, great, add it to your resume. If it's something that, you know, like if it's extremely, like you have to have practice, like Salesforce is something that's hard to teach yourself because you have to have access to that tool, then know that there's other ways to kind of get noticed, even if you don't have all the preferred skills. But we'll talk a little bit about where skills go on the resume, but skills are the starting point for this process. If only because, like, I don't know if any of you guys are humanities majors, but if you get a degree in English, you're not going to graduate and be in English, right? You are going to find a job that represents the intersection of things you can do and things someone will pay you to do, right? Like that's a magic intersection. That's where the skills come in. And that's where your options are mapped out through the skills that you bring to whatever you're doing. The other step that people often forget, which is why we put it at number 2, this isn't something you do at the end. This is something you do throughout, is you do the networking into the fields that are starting to interest you. A lot of fields have transformed. Demand in some fields has gone down. Demand in other fields has gone up. So if you were sitting there networking your behind off into hospitality, right? Maybe you're like event planning, event planning, event planning. Guess what? There aren't that many event planning jobs right now. That means you need to make sure that you're equally growing your network in whatever related field or field of interest you have that represents that intersection of your skills and what the market is asking for right now. Networking right now is really interesting because people are trapped inside. And a lot of people are in this weird kind of stasis in the market. So it's actually a kind of low, it's not a very big ask to ask if you can do a quick Zoom call. It's not saying, hey, can you leave your work 15 minutes early and meet me at a Starbucks? It's literally saying, hey, do you have 15 minutes for a quick Zoom call? I'd love to hear more about your career pathway. And that's really the easiest way to do networking. I'll talk about informational interviewing in a minute, but just be aware of Ask, the Alumni Sharing Knowledge Program or platform, and LinkedIn as two really important goals for that. I'm just looking at the notes in the chat. Okay, great. So we'll talk about tailoring and dealing with experience versus lack of experience in a little bit. So in terms of informational interviews, you can see this is an image of a handout that we have in the Career Center. We have a whole library of these handouts. This one is a good example of what we tried to do, which is create really micro-learning targets with actionable examples. So for example, on the back of this sheet is a sample informational interview request that you can use. And essentially an informational interview is just you asking to hear about someone's career pathway. Now, the goal of that interview is conversation. It's not, I'm going to do this informational interview and then get a job offer, right? It's not a cause and effect, but it is a way to build your network. Do I have it in this slide or the previous slide where, oh yeah. Oh, sorry, I skipped ahead. Is my back, okay, sorry, I'm going kind of slow. Oh, I don't know where that data point is, but essentially, according to some statistics, 85% of jobs are not advertised. So if you are not networking, if you're not doing informational interviews, you're only applying to 15% of the jobs that you could get. So that is how important the networking piece is. And to my mind, informational interviewing is the easiest, kind of lowest stakes way of doing it that has the highest impact. Now, the point is conversation. It's not transactional. That being said, at the end of a conversation with someone who you're networking with, you might say something like, this has been really great. It's so helpful. Is there anyone else you think I should connect with? Or you might say, this has been so helpful. You know, if you know of any opportunities that come up in the next couple of months, I'd love to hear about them. Thanks so much for your time. Right? So there's a way at the end of the informational interview or a networking conversation to kind of leverage yourself. And you know, the rule of thumb is if you follow up after any informational interview, let's say you informational interview someone at Slack, they're in Chicago. So let's say I informational interview someone there, and then a month or so later I apply for a job there. You can follow up with the person you informational interviewed and say, hey, just wanted to let you know I applied for a job at Slack. I'm really excited about it. Also, just wanted to thank you again for your time, right? So you're always adding a little bit of value when you connect with someone, but this is very important. And do not forget family, friends, professional orgs. Those are other great sources for networking. Any questions about informational interviews or networking or how to connect with folks? One thing I've started encouraging students to consider doing, normally I'll say, hey, try and find their email address. You know, maybe you find them on LinkedIn, but you figure out what the email naming protocol is for their employer and you email them. That's one way to do it. You can also click connect on LinkedIn and put your informational interview request in that message. If you try and simply message in LinkedIn, it will ask you to pay for premium, and we don't want you to have to do that. So that's kind of a sneaky way to get your informational interview request through LinkedIn, but you can also find their email by guessing it. And the good news is, if that email is wrong, it just gets bounced back to you. So you try it differently. All right, step number 3 is really important. We're going to get into some tactics here. You want to customize every resume and cover letter for every role, which sounds really, 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 really fatiguing and time consuming. Especially because we're in the kind of job market now where you might have 4 or 5 different roles that appeal to you that you are qualified for. So you're gonna probably have a minimum of 4 or 5 different resumes and cover letters. How different will they be? Not very different, but different enough that you want to be attentive to that. Because the most important thing is that this resume is going to get you the interview. But let's go through some real quick resume facts. Number 1, the average resume is looked at for 6 seconds. Sorry, I have to tell my son to turn his volume down. 1 second. I'm just going to mute. Sorry, he's gaming. Okay. So if a recruiter is looking at a resume for an average of 6 seconds, that means there are some really, really important things to consider when designing your resume. We're going to get into those. Some other fun facts around the resume is that the average corporate job, this is pre-pandemic, gets 250 applications. I'm going to mute one more time. I'm really sorry. It's being super loud. 1 second. I clicked the wrong thing. Sorry. So pre-pandemic, the average corporate job got 250 applications, and almost every employer uses an applicant tracking system. The fact is that only 30% of the applications that are submitted even get looked at by the human eye, because applicant tracking systems are skimming for keywords, and these are skills-based keywords. They're not skimming for locations, they're skimming for names of technology and skills. Typically hard skills, very rarely soft skills. So for every type of job you're applying to, you're gonna have a set of skills that you make sure to integrate in each resume, but you'll also be ready to scan that particular job description and look for other skills, because sometimes there's idiosyncratic. So for example, you might be interested in social media. Maybe there's a role where they're really heavy WordPress, right? Maybe there's a role where it's heavier on Twitter. You want to know what those keywords are. Now, in most cases, you can have too many keywords, and that's better than not the right ones, because that is the filter that is going to make sure that your resume gets looked at. So that's how important we started with skills, because they're the most important piece of this now that we live in the world of applicant tracking systems. The other thing that's very important with those 6 seconds is visual immediacy. I'm just going to mute one more time. I'm sorry. I'm going to try and get him to move. I'm sorry again. I hope the screaming behind me stops. All right. So if the average recruiter is only looking at this for 6 seconds, you know, and that's on the for the 30% that make it through the applicant tracking system, you want to have high impact in that 6 seconds. They've done eye tracking on recruiters, and they read resumes in an F pattern. It used to be, but when we read print, we read them in a Z pattern. But what you want to think about knowing all of that is really controlling a couple things. The most important thing is information architecture. After keywords, the most important thing is really organizing the information so that I can skim it. So if I have 6 seconds, I can get what I need in 6 seconds, and I don't have to look deep. Am I going to deeply look into those accomplishment statements in that 6 seconds? I am not. I am going to be looking for the skills keywords I need in only a couple places. In job titles, so that's really important. If you have a job title that doesn't sound like a skill, so for example, there are many, many, many students who work at DePaul who are student assistants. You need to think about, is there a different job title that would be more meaningful and more accurately communicate my experience on my resume? You can always go to the person you report to on campus, off campus, and say, hey, on my resume, I know I'm technically a student assistant, but can I call myself marketing assistant? Can I call myself data assistant? You want language that the reader gets right away. And as long as the person you report to is fine with it, there is no such thing as a transcript for jobs. There's no way for anybody to go to HR. And in fact, in HR, my title is different from my title on the website because it's just a job category. So keep in mind your job titles need to really showcase. The other thing you can do is you can have multiple skill-based experience sections. If you're not in a traditional business environment, a business environment, they love a good old single experience section. The other thing to think about in terms of getting the most relevant keywords and experience on here is a skills section. Now, I will say this, in technology, the skills section is almost always at the top. In almost every other field, I leave the skills section at the bottom because if I have it formatted very, efficiently and effectively, it will be so skimmable, it will totally work. So for example here, you can see data and design intern on the right-hand side of the screen, or probably, I don't know if it's your right, but that was an internship I worked. I didn't work this internship, but one of my students did, and their title was intern. So we said, well, what is it? In one resume, we're calling it data and design. In another resume, we're calling it journalism, depending on the keywords that are most meaningful to the role they're applying to. Community health researcher is a great example of that's a class at DePaul. Well, actually, that's a project. Community health research was a project that a student took part of as part of an active citizens course, and they mapped a class project into an experience section. The other option is to map a class project or a personal project into a project section. Like, it's up to you. If you put it on your resume, you're not saying I got paid to do it. You're saying you did it. So I'll talk a little bit more about projects, but also think through formatting in terms of layers of importance. So we can see clearly in this handout, all caps bold, level 1, bold normal case, level 2, normal case, not bold, level 3. I have a clear pattern. You can see my eye moves quickly through those bolded horizontals because again, I'm looking at an F pattern, which is why I particularly like to have the job title on the top or in front of the employer, because that's going to be where you get the keyword. Even if your employer is really impressive, I like to have that job title right up top. And I like to use white space really intentionally to make it feel like that 6 seconds is fast, right? Like if I have a really dense thing, I'm just overwhelmed and the information architecture, it has a harder time working. Any questions about what I'm talking about in terms of the design part of this? All right, let me just see if there's any in the chat. Not yet. Okay.
I do not have questions regarding the design part, but I wanted to know, since this session is being recorded, can we get it on our email too? Because I just joined a little late.
Yeah, you'll get the recording and the slide deck and relevant handouts.
Okay, thank you so much.
No problem. Actually, if you're interested, I have a whole slide deck only on resume design that I can include for you guys. It'll go through, from conservative to creative, and you can kind of decide where you're at on that.
I think that would be great. Thank you so much.
No problem. All right, the other thing you can do at DePaul. So I work with a lot of people who are like, I don't have a ton of professional experience in this field. And then I mine and ask questions. And it turns out they actually do have experience. It's just not necessarily through employment, right? So there is almost no kind of project at DePaul that you can't put on your resume as evidence of a skill. And this is, when you think about it, and I worked in the past with a lot of graphic designers, their entire portfolio when they were looking for jobs was based on class assignments. This is work they did in school. That's not that dissimilar from what we're doing in education anywhere. This handout that I will include in the follow-up for you guys has sample resume formatted projects that vary from research projects to volunteer experiences to creative assignments. Now, like I said before, they could be in a project section, but generally I prefer to put these in a relevant experience section or a section called research experience, or event planning experience, a skill-based experience section, because these are often the best sources of evidence of someone's skills. Like, for example, if you're an IT person, one of the things I end up putting on a lot of resumes is that bomb lab assignment that everyone has to do to debug or whatever. I don't know that much about technology, but I know that bomb lab assignment is a complicated, big project that students do. And we put that on there because that's a great place to get your keywords in, where you can talk about specific programming languages or knowledge around those tools. Here are three examples here. The first one, these are all from DePaul assignments or projects. This first one is a good old research paper. The student I was working with was applying for pre-law research positions at a think tank. So his experience section was research experience, and he had a ton of his papers in there. So essentially what you do if you decide to take any of this and put it onto your resume, he started with title and then a descriptor, which was a policy paper. Now, if this was 30 pages, he would probably say 30-page policy paper. And then he went through all the things he had to do to make this happen and formatted them just like you would a job description. Because this was an assignment that he did over 10 weeks, which is a whole quarter, same as an internship. And so he used verbs to identify the skills he used to do the work he needed to do. The same thing with the social media campaign. Now, a lot of people in creative fields have what we call spec clients, meaning speculative clients, which is what this third category is. Did the Shed Aquarium pay this student to do an animation? No, they created it as part of a class assignment as if the Shed Aquarium had hired them. So this was a spec project that they did, that they animated, and you just bullet the same way you would bullet a job description, the things that you achieved. Like you might have in some sections, title, descriptor. In other examples, you might have like at the bottom, title, descriptor, and then spec client. So these are just some of the ways you can do projects on your resume. Any questions about projects on the resume? We have a lot of examples, but I'm curious if anybody has any specific questions. All right. Now this one is a little less tactical, but you'd be surprised how important this is, particularly during the pandemic. If you can build a community, as small as that even could be, that could be 2 people, that could be one friend of yours who's also internship searching or job searching, that could be 3 people you know who are doing this, that could be a park district or a library that has job search accountability groups, because most neighborhoods, or at least like workforce counties and libraries have these. Having a community is going to help you in terms of accountability, because you are going to apply to minimum 30, 40 jobs, probably more, or internships, probably more. Because it's a numbers game, because not every job that's up on the internet is still open, because you don't know if they already have an internal candidate, because this is just the volume that we should be expecting now. Now, you might apply to 10 and get the one you want. I'm not saying that this is going to be for everybody, but I would go into this process with the assumption, you know, I'm going to do a lot of this. And I'll talk a little bit about project managing that. But one big part of this is that personal accountability that feels supportive and not retributive. So if you have a buddy or 2 buddies and you meet every other week or every weekend, you just do a quick 10-minute check-in. How many jobs did you apply to? Did you apply to the one I sent you? You know, do you need me to look at your resume? Having that second eye can be really useful. So we're a big fan of kind of talking to students about how important that is. We did have a job search club in the summer, and we'll probably revive that later in winter and for spring. So that'll be possible, but it can work as simply as just 2 friends and you guys meet once a week over Zoom and you just talk about your process. We're currently doing it in the Career Center with a couple of our student employees who are in this process. And every single session, and these are student employees who help advise, they're remembering, oh, I forgot to do that one thing that you told me about. So it can be really great. The other thing is fuel your search by constantly staying in touch with some of the trends in those spaces that you're applying to, because that will energize you a little bit and keep you engaged in whatever the disciplines are that you're looking at. Now this organization part, so I talked a little bit about support. This is the part that is going to be key to making this manageable, is really figuring out a process for this search, internship or job. Let me just interrupt real quick my normal presentation, tell you a little bit about timeline. If you're applying to, I'm trying to think, I don't have a slide for this, but I can tell you right now that if you're searching for a summer internship, There are, of course, industries like accounting and some tech roles that recruit in fall for the following summer. But across the board in every other industry, and in addition to tech and some business, the majority of internships get posted in March for summer. So when I'm working with a student who's just really eager to do a summer internship, I recommend this is the time to get all your documents ready to go now, because starting January 15th, mid-January, when everybody's back from the holidays and machines start moving again, that's when they're going to start appearing. They'll appear in January, more in February, and then the peak in March. And then there will be plenty in April and plenty in May. But in terms of timeline, that's how I would think of it. In the job search, the timeline is not predictable at all. Generally, you have to assume if I'm applying for, let's say I finish my degree in June, I would start applying for jobs late April. And that's on the early end because sometimes you want to hire in a month. But it's a relatively safe risk to take. If you're in a different industry, like if you're, like that's in general. If you want to apply to colleges, you apply in April to start in July, to start in September sometimes. So industries vary a little bit. If you're graduating, because of our quarter system, if you're graduating in March, you would start applying, I would say about end of January, early February. But job application, the whole search is a muscle, and you get better and better and better as you do it. So I say get some of your documents ready to go now, even if you're not going to search right away, because there will be those weird magic things that appear out of nowhere that aren't part of the normal timeline. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how to organize. Okay, so this sounds simple, but we love a spreadsheet in the Career Center for organizing your search. I actually have started recommending that your spreadsheet have multiple tabs. So the most important tab is going to be the jobs tab, right? Because that's going to be where we track all the search. I would maintain a couple other tabs, not necessarily all of these. One, to track some skill training that you might be interested in, depending on how aggressively you're job searching. One, to track some webinars that maybe you hear that are good networking opportunities. So, one, to track just the straight up networking piece of it, like who am I targeting, how, what industries are they in. Another one could track professional orgs. You could merge that with webinars. And then articles and resources, if you see things like, oh, this is an interesting article from Harvard Business Review that I can reference in my interview, because we want to think ahead a little bit and be really prepared for the interview by the time we get it. This handout here really focuses on this first tab here. So I'm going to walk through that. So you can see pretty simple structure of a spreadsheet. We're recommending that you, of course, track posting date, when you can get it, deadline, status, all the important things that you need to have. But I'm going to go through some of the more idiosyncratic parts of our advice. Interest level, you're like, well, I'm putting it on here. Aren't I interested? You're probably not going to apply to everything you put on this spreadsheet. This spreadsheet is kind of like a shopping list. So if you, as you throw jobs in here or internships, track your interest level. Give it a score from 1 to 5, because then when you get out of class an hour early and you've got time to do 2 applications, you don't spend half that time trying to remember which one you really want to do, because this information will be a blur by the time you get a lot of opportunities into here. So give it a score. Also, the one on the furthest right-hand side, at least my right-hand side, type of role. This is the key to making this process not a 40-hour-a-week job. Track the kinds of roles you're applying to, because as you apply to those roles, you will use a previous resume and cover letter that most closely matches that role. You're not going to apply to 100 different kinds of jobs, right? So the edit you make on each specific resume and cover letter should be this big, right? It should be a tiny edit. After you've applied to a certain number of jobs, you should only be tweaking. And the only way you can do that with any level of organization is to label as you apply, this is the kind of role I applied to. So here's an example. This is that column for someone who's interested. This is a person who has like a poli-sci degree, but who's interested in a lot of different categories. Maybe their first resume and cover letter was straight up research. Their next one was community outreach. Their next one was fundraising and events. So these are like the primary functions of those roles. The next one was data and policy research. By the time they got to another community outreach, they knew which resume and cover letter combination to start with. And then their edit took 10 minutes, 15 minutes at the most. This is how you're going to make this an efficient process for you, where you're both really narrowly tailoring your documents and you're not taking 100 hours to do it. So this is really key in terms of making this doable. The other thing I'll say is, okay, so I'm going to go through a couple pro tips. Number one, I talked a little bit about this, but I didn't call it out. But this is one of your options if you're not in a very traditional space, like in accounting, you can't do this. In tech, you could. I mean, it kind of depends. We might have a reason to do it, we might not. I love at least toying with the idea of a functional resume, depending on what skills you bring. This is particularly useful for those of you who have some of this project-based experience. We can map it into a skill-based experience section. So you can see on this one, a functional resume really takes a couple of your functions, creates your job experience or your experience sections from that, and then I order it. They're reverse chronological within that section, but I get to put the most relevant on top. So for example, if for the last 2 years I was doing social media, but before that I had all these volunteer projects where I did a ton of like K-12 curriculum design, if I had a functional resume, I could start with education experience and then have an additional experience if I wanted. I wouldn't even necessarily have to, but I could have an additional experience section that was lower, so I could control the experience of the reader. And this is getting increasingly popular, but like I said, in the more conservative worlds of business, they want a good old reverse chronological experience section that's primarily work. Another way to beat that 6 seconds, this is probably my favorite thing, because this is actually going to really help you tailor your resume and cover letter, is to create a summary at the top of your resume. Please don't use an objective. You don't need those anymore. Those were important when I got a piece of paper and I had to put it in a file, but I don't do that anymore. Now the paper is attached digitally to a job code, so I know what you're applying to. But this summary, which you can format in 2 to 3 lines at the top of your resume, italicized, gives the recruiter, the screener, the reader, a real quick read of what you are, right? So these are often written as fragments. So these examples are cinematographer, videographer, storyboard artist, producer, and editor with experience in feature film, documentary filmmaking, political media, and commercial advertising. Like, that's a lot, right? I jam-packed a lot. That's perfect for someone who's interested in a role where those skills are really important. Another version, emerging events and public relations professional with a passion for creating community and engaging diverse audience and meaningful experiences. This, you come out the gate saying, hey, I'm an events and public relations professional, or I'm a mental health professional. You don't have to have the word emerging. And you can have something you're passionate, but you could also have skills in here. This, to me, what I'm doing when I'm rating one of these at the top, and you're not going to use all of these are just different samples. I am then skimming the resume for evidence. You've convinced me at the top, I just need proof. By writing the summary, you're doing all the work of the screener who's trying to decode your resume. You're like, you decode it at the top, and then they look for evidence. So it's one of my favorite things to recommend. Again, if you're in a really, like, it's not as risky as a functional resume as far as like traditional or non-traditional, but I will say the ones I do see are often too long, right? I don't need complete sentences. I don't need stuff that, like, I'd rather have hard skills up here and then maybe something you're passionate about, but I don't want to see, you know, leader. I just don't need to see stuff that's so general that I don't believe it. But if you get real specific up here, I get really excited about that. Questions about the summary? It's very similar to what you would do on LinkedIn in terms of your about or your headline even. Another pro tip, if you guys haven't seen this before, I'm going to take you out of the presentation into the MC Resume Optimizer. I'm going to load the example. Essentially what you do is you copy and paste your resume into here. It'll identify every skill keyword in here. So this mimics an applicant tracking system. And then I'll throw a job in here. I'm going to throw an IT job, IT specialist. You pick a job that is closest to the kind of job you're applying to. And what it will do is it will tell you which key skills you already have in your resume. This one has 4 of them, but it will also tell you what you're missing. And this isn't the ending place for making sure you have all the keywords, but this is a great start. This is a really good start. And you can see this resume is an operations person, someone who worked in a call center. So of course they're missing some of these terms. But you'd be surprised at when you put in a resume that's similar or that has a relationship with the role, it does find some little details that you sometimes miss. Of course, you're going to scan the job description to make sure that there aren't other keywords that you want to pay attention to, but this is one of my favorite tools. What I love most about it is that it's free and it requires 0 registration, which is so rare on the internet. So I just threw that in the chat. Let's see what else we got here. Of course, I'll go through what we can do for you. We're open all of winter break except for the dates the school's closed, which is a lot of dates. I think it's 23rd through the 31st or something crazy. But we have an appointment availability all the way up until the 23rd. I think our drop-in coaching is actually suspended for winter break, but there's actual schedulable appointments. We do have the email resume review. That does have a wait time, so there's like a 5 to 7 day wait. We also have the career library that I've talked about a little bit before that will be linked in the email I send you of over 50 handouts, some of which you've seen. And then of course on Handshake, we have a ton of opportunities. And then we also have our alumni sharing knowledge for you. I'm curious, so like I always like to leave plenty of time. I'm gonna just stop sharing and maybe I'll reshare if there's questions. I'm curious if you guys have any specific questions about that I can answer you about where to search, because that's one thing I don't typically cover in here. But I'm just curious what kinds of questions you have. I'm gonna stop sharing for just a minute.
Yes, I have one question. I'm currently studying Masters in Marketing Analytics at DePaul University. So, I mean, at Kelsdale Graduate School of Business. I have been lately applying to summer internships, but there are hardly any postings on Handshake. And I feel Handshake is the first place where I can put my hands on for getting or securing an internship. So I wanted to know what platforms do I apply for marketing, and as you mentioned, by March there will be more openings for summer internships. So what things shall I keep in mind? I did understand the entire presentation that you mentioned that we need to clearly tailor our resume and make our resume not too much verbose, but in a way that the 6 seconds are worth it.
Yeah, and a lot of that is formatting, which is frankly, very few career centers talk about formatting as much as I will, if only because I work with design students for so long. And I think that's something people don't take advantage of. In terms of Handshake, one thing I'll say about Handshake is it's a great tool, but there are some limitations. Number one limitation is that there are certain industries that have traditionally recruited on campus. Like, that's what they do. Tech and business recruit on campus, right? Now, those folks will be on Handshake because they do that. There's every other industry doesn't typically recruit on campus, but some of them do on our Handshake because they're DePaul, right? Because these employers love DePaul. So they're like, you know what? We don't recruit on campus. We're not going to go to a career fair, but we're going to recruit at DePaul. Bosch is probably a good example. I don't know that they go to a ton of career fairs, but boy, do they come to DePaul because they love our students. So it's a great place to start, terrible place to finish because there's so many other opportunities. I mean, that has changed over time. Like Handshake's getting more opportunities than it had in the past. But in terms of boards, there's a couple different kind of job boards. I love an industry-specific job board, like American Marketing Association. I think those can be great. Sometimes they get, sometimes they're gate kept and there's a cost associated with those. Of course, LinkedIn is becoming increasingly more competitive against the other job boards. So that's why the organizing the search is the biggest challenge, because you're probably going to be looking on Handshake, LinkedIn, Indeed. I love Indeed because it's messy, but Indeed is like an aggregator of all job boards. And then oddly, Monster's kind of back in the game. So, and then you add to that your professional association job boards. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of organizing. But I've increasingly seen, LinkedIn is interesting though, because I will say every other board, when you're like in Handshake, you can see jobs that you're not qualified for. On LinkedIn, the algorithm is so aggressive, but it works. So, I mean, but you could also have, that's why I like staying in touch with Indeed. And what I do when I'm working with students who are open-minded, I'll get out on Indeed, type in the keyword internship, and then no other keyword. And then like everything falls apart. It's chaos there, but it's still interesting because you see what's available. But yeah, look for those industry specific job boards. Every profession has them. Some are better than others. For example, if you're in media or entertainment, entertainmentcareers.net is amazing, but they are a profit-based company. So you have to pay, you have to subscribe, but the free search gets you enough information to find that posting somewhere else. So we're constantly recommending students check out entertainmentcareers.net, but we're also like, don't pay for it. Just do this other back-end search to find the posting somewhere free. But I've seen LinkedIn is really consistent. But that being said, you gotta make sure you're out on those other boards. Like tech has its own job boards. And they do change in popularity pretty aggressively. I also do think that in terms of summer, there are gonna be some amazing things that pop up in January and early February that no one's paying attention to. So keep your eyes open. If you're looking for an internship for winter, because of the holidays here, you could still apply in early January for some of those. Like
Yes,
that
because
timeline's less
um,
structured.
yeah, exactly. Like I am applying to a lot of jobs and I mean a lot of internships. I mean, I don't see the timeline. I just keep applying and majority of the internships are for winter and they keep asking me, "Can you work from January? Can you work from winter?" But since I'm an international student, I'm not eligible to work from Jan. I can only start from summer and onwards. So I'm like I just keep on telling them if there are any opportunities coming this summer 2021, I would like to join a company because that's what I can do as of now.
I'm going to show you my most important pro tip that I'm now realizing that I don't have in this deck, and I will have to add before I send this out. I don't know why I didn't have this in here before. There's a way to get around the applicant tracking systems 100%. For everything you really want, this takes time, but if you want something really badly or badly at all, you can send your materials directly to the hiring manager in addition to applying through the system. Like you have to apply through the system. But let's find a job and I'll show you an example. Let's just do PR. Let's see if I can do, I'll show you that we'll see how predictable or unpredictable this is. I'm gonna do Chicago, although increasingly, guys, leave location blank because for now there's gonna be some remote opportunities. I'm gonna change this to internship. We'll see how easy, for some jobs this will be easy, for some jobs this will be hard. Oh, these unpaids make me so mad. Oh, quick thing, if you are considering doing an unpaid internship for spring or summer, we have a program called Internship Plus that I will link in the email that funds unpaid internships. And did you know you can go to any, like it's easier for a nonprofit, but you can go to any nonprofit and say, hey, I'm applying for funding for an unpaid internship at DePaul. I'd be interested in doing this and this for you. Would you be a host? That's a backdoor internship. That's you getting an internship that was never posted. And especially if it's a nonprofit, like let's say, I mean, some of the museums already pay for internships, but let's say it's a really interesting nonprofit and they're like, oh, I'm gonna get free labor. They might say yes to that because it's like, they know you're getting paid by DePaul. So that's something to think about. You can apply to, let me quickly show you where Internship Plus is here. And then I'll go through my other tip, sorry. Actually, now that I'm saying that though, I don't think grad students can apply. So sorry. But if you're an undergrad, know that, and you will be enrolled in fall. The application for winter is over, but the spring one will be open relatively soon. And you find information about that in Scholarship Connect. All right, let's find someone. Okay, community marketing intern. I don't know that this is a perfect one, but I'm gonna give you an example. So let's say I want to apply to this. I go through their job board, I apply to it. Let me take a quick look. Actually, I'm gonna do this one, it's gonna be more fun. All right, so this is a wealth management firm. Marketing intern, marketing department. Cool, cool, cool. Okay. It's posted 30 days ago. I don't love that. Prioritize jobs that are more recent, but I'll use them as an example. Okay, so let's go to Cerity Partners. So the first thing I'll do, this is a process, this pays off. That's all I can say. Like the last 2 people I interviewed for a job at the Career Center had directly messaged me their resume and cover letter because I don't have access to the applicant portal. So I only got resumes and cover letters in a pack of 15 every 10 days. So these came along and I was like, hey, can we interview them? Like I didn't even need, they were great. Okay, so I go to the company. I'm like, all right, this is in their marketing department. I look to see if they have information about the people who work there. So I went to team. Not every business has this. I'm just gonna go to team and now I'm gonna go to marketing. I'm surprised they have this much information. All right, so now I go to marketing. Senior associate, partner, principal. Oof, we don't want partners or principals. They're too high up. I can't quite tell. So I'm gonna do a little more research. I'm gonna go to LinkedIn. And I am going to look up this employer on LinkedIn. Oh, and you know you can be anonymous on LinkedIn. Like no one has to see that you're looking for them. Let me show you that real quick. Settings. You can go to, I think it's change. Jobs. No, where is it? Good gravy. This has changed a little bit. Where, is it an account preference? Language, content.
I think it's invisibility.
Where is that? They have just moved this. Do you know where that's at? I might have to Google this and send this to you in a link.
Left-hand side.
First of all, you don't have to do this. When you're a job seeker, it's okay that you're clicking on people. But, oh, visibility, thank you, sorry. And then I do. This is totally, oh, okay, here we go. Nope, I still don't see it. There's a whole thing where you can say who sees when you're clicking on their profile. I'll find it and I will add the link in my follow-up. Let me show you quickly though how we find the hiring manager. And you don't have to be 100% right to do this. Sorry, I will spell this wrong if I don't. Cerity Partners. This is fun. I feel like an internet detective when I do this. Okay, so this might be a big employer. Oh, geez. Oh, only 215, that's not that bad. All right, so I'm looking at all the people who work there. I found a research and marketing associate. That's interesting. I can do a filter where I put in title marketing. And this is free. I don't pay for premium. Don't pay for premium if you can avoid it. If you're a current student, though, you do have access to LinkedIn Learning. All right, principal marketing, research and marketing associate, senior marketing associate. I like a senior marketing associate rather than the principal because that's a little high up. Now, Madeline Thomas might not be the person who's hiring, but she will know who's hiring this job because also she's in Chicago, the other people weren't. Now, are we gonna message her on LinkedIn? Not necessarily. Now I'm gonna show you a good old people Google search. So if you search their URL, if I wanna guess what her email is, I'm literally gonna do a quote, which used to be a Boolean search term. And I'm gonna start with Smith at the URL. Oh, I did the whole URL, sorry. I'm gonna search this. And I will I will search for anyone whose email address is on the internet. Usually I'm just skimming for, like we can see here, that guy's Twitter. We don't want that. And I just use Smith because it's a very common name, but you can even just do, and look at it, took the quotes out. Used to be the internet was a little more aggressive about that. So now I'll go straight to page 3 or 4. I'm looking for someone who signed up for a marathon or adopted a dog. I'm looking for anyone's name. Got one, think so. Resco. That could be a name. Oh, we got another one. Okay, so let's look at this person. CER, so I did a quick search at Cerity. So now we can see first letter, first name, whole last name, that's their email naming protocol. So if I apply for this internship, through the company site. Let's see if it's still up. Okay, it's still here. That doesn't mean it's still happening, but it could. So if I apply for this, I customize, I make it awesome. I then also email M. Thomas. Now there's always a risk there's multiple of those, and we'll have to think through what that could be. And I say, hi, I say something like, dear Ms. Thomas, I recently applied for the marketing internship at Cerity Partners, and I wanted to pass along my application materials to you. I'm really excited about this opportunity because blah, 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 a little bit from your cover letter. And then if you're not the hiring manager for this role, please feel free to forward my materials to whoever is in charge or whatever, something like that. If you do that for every job you're passionate about, that is going to be game changing for you. That is truly the best pro tip. It is time intensive. I mean, really, that only took me like 5 minutes, but you won't always get a response, but that is a way to all of a sudden, I'm not even part of that 30%. I got around the entire applicant tracking system, and they saw my resume without anyone giving it to them. So that's a real, like if you're working with me and we're just like, man, we're still looking and looking and looking, I'm always like, all right, let's move to this level. That's pro level. And then the other pro level is the minute you identify an employer, let's say you're like, you know what, I found this job. I would really love to work at this employer. They have a couple jobs. That's where you start getting your networking targets. You actually target people at the employers you're interested in working at, even if they don't have a job posted. In fact, sometimes it's better if they don't. And particularly if you're an international student, this is key. Networking is 1,000 times even more important for international students because of the cost and the constraints around visa sponsorship and all that stuff. Like if you're going to be able to network into a job easier than you are any kind of application. And that's true for everyone, but it's particularly true for international students, unfortunately, because you're then getting around all of that red tape that would normally be there for you. Any questions about that pro tip? Any industry specific questions? Oh, I see a question. Should the skills always be at the bottom? Most tech folks have the skills at the top because that is truly the most important part. And many tech folks have, instead of just a skills section, they might have multiple skills sections at the top. It might be by function. So you might have technical skills and then networking : programming : and then everything else. And I am not a great tech advisor. I can advise tech folks, but I don't always know all those categories. When I'm working with students who do technology, I'm doing a little bit of research. But the good news for you is our career communities have advisors who have deep knowledge of all of these industries. And particularly the ambassadors, oddly, these are student employees, many of whom are grad students who have been working in the field. So our tech career community advisor, she's been working in the field. Our business community advisor, he's been working in the field for 10 years. I mean, these are our ambassadors in addition to our staff. So a lot of deep technical information, but this is all mostly about strategy. So any other like industry specific strategy question, job board question?
I wanted to know, as per the current scenario with the marketing industry, what are the skills that every company is looking for a marketing analyst role?
I think, so this is part of that fueling the job search by staying on top of trends. I actually, right now, there's more industry conversations happening online than ever before, right? Because no one's in offices or at conferences or anything like that. I think that in general, well, data in general has gotten really, really important. I would also say, I'm also recommending folks make sure they have knowledge of content management systems. So for example, I know it sounds dumb, but Wix, WordPress, or a professional content management system. But what I would do is I would look at your industries and, like, for example, I referenced the American Marketing Association. You're going to see trends on their website, and there's the Chicago American Marketing Association. But I also think there's probably subgroups and sub-professional groups around data analysis in marketing, I would start, that's why I love on that one spreadsheet having multiple tabs, because you can start tracking trends, because that will inform your resume, that will totally inform your interview, and it will likely inform your cover letter. Now, I haven't talked about cover letters at all, but I will attach our handout, which has a really good sample. It's very similar to our approach to the summary, where you make a real strong claim at the top and then you just provide evidence throughout. But yeah, I mean, I think I would, in terms of, I haven't dipped recently into marketing and data analysis and marketing. Honestly, the research you're going to do is on those job boards. You're going to look and see, okay, what are those things? You're going to look on LinkedIn and see people who got a job a month ago doing that and see what the heck is on their resume. Like, I don't think we use LinkedIn as a teaching tool as much as we could. And then if they're you know, you can be connecting to these folks too, particularly if they're, you know, from DePaul, or, you know, they're emerging. Like, this is the point at which you can start to build that network as well, even in a more passive way, just by connecting on LinkedIn.
Question for you. So what kind of an appointment would you recommend making for if I'm looking to get specific help about internships? I am a non-traditional student. So just kind of like trying to figure out the best type of internship to apply for, and like how to kind of like market the skills that I do have, because I am coming from working in a different industry already. What kind of appointment would you recommend for that?
Well, we have a category of exploration, which is great for people who might be pivoting or who are still really open-minded. One thing I will definitely say too is that every single one of the advisors has a very different style. So like, you might, let's say you dip around and you're like, well, I'm interested in marketing, but I'm also kind of interested in like nonprofits. Like, you could meet with both of those folks and you would get a sense of like, is that the vibe that works best for you in terms of the advising you get? And then what do they know? What do they know that the other person doesn't know? And then the other person knows more. So I would encourage dipping around into a couple of the communities, but we do have exploration appointments through the month of December. They're actually going to be hosted by our ambassador, Amy, who currently works at Cards for Humanity. So I would dip in, and then if Amy's really dry, and then Ed, who's the staff advisor, is like the opposite. So like, I would dip around and see what you like. But I would definitely meet with an industry specific, exploration or an industry specific appointment. But if you call to make the appointment, when you speak to folks at the front desk, they're going to ask you a bunch of prompting questions and give you advice about like, okay, well, that sounds like Ed, or that sounds like Jen, or that sounds like they have deep knowledge of what our staff does.
Mm-hmm. And you said there are appointments over winter break, because I think I tried to make one on Handshake and I wasn't able to make one on there. So is that just something I have to call to do?
You do not have to call. I'm going to check right now, because this is, we just sent an email promoting our appointment, so we better have some availability. And while I do that real quick, let me just put my poll out. This is our checkout event. Okay. And then let me get into my appointments and make sure. That would be such a bummer. That can't be true. All right, new appointment. Do you remember which community?
Yeah, I'm part of the tech community, so I think I was trying to make an appointment, I think with Lorne. I'd emailed him before.
Oh, you should meet with Sang.
Sang?
Mm-hmm. He has, oh, I'm so sorry. This Handshake is so confusing. Let's see. I think it's all Sang. Oh, Lorne has one appointment available on Monday the 14th.
I don't know why I couldn't see anything on there. Okay.
And then he's got some on Tuesday the 15th too. So, but yeah, if Handshake is acting weird, call, because they will be able to do it over the phone too during our regular hours, and our phones are still working. The only thing that we won't be doing, I think starting next week, or maybe, I don't know, probably not tomorrow, we're not going to be doing the drop-ins because we had so little usage of them. Okay. We're going to be using our time on the email resume review, but you can call and they'll walk you through.
And is that just where, do I just hit DePaul Career Center and go to appointments, and that should take me? Okay, yeah, I'm having an issue. I'll call.
Bummer.
Yeah. Thank you, though.
That's so weird. I could schedule you right now if you want. If you want to stay on, I'll do that. Let me stop recording real quick.